exploring today. We are in central Rome. Sorry about the cough. We are in central Rome, and it's that area between Piazza di Venezia with the large Vittoriano, the large white marble building, also known as the Altar of the Fatherland. Speaking of which, today Italy celebrates Liberation Day. April 25th, 1945, Italy was declared free from the Nazi occupation and from the fascist dictatorship. So this is still national holiday in Italy. And this area is also connected with the fashion, so I'll be describing some elements of that during the talk. Anyway, today there is a half-mile long straight wide road, quite unusual for central Rome, quite a wide boulevard, which is built by knocking down many older buildings in 1930s to connect the Piazza di Venezia with the Colosseum that you can see down there at the back. And along there's hundreds of ruins, most of them kind of overlooked by millions of tourists, which flock to the Colosseum or to see the square or even to visit the ancient Roman Forum right here, which this was the political and religious center of Roman Empire, and the Imperial Palace, the Palatino, right there on the right, this nice hill. Let's go flat again and zoom out a little bit. Now, you could see that there's a number of ruined buildings, but even from above, you can recognize that they were large square with large monuments, temples, and buildings, court of justice, and other administrative and religious building. In the basically first century before Christ, there was 100 years long civil war between different factions during the Roman Empire. And as the result, eventually Julius Caesar was the one who was able to basically take control of this whole area. And he started that process, which was then, continued and completed by Emperor Augustus, the very first Roman emperor, and led to the creation of separate squares next to the ancient one, the ancient Roman Forum, right by where the Senate was. This brick building that you see here, it was the ancient Curia, basically was the Senate where the senators used to meet. It was under construction at the time of Julius Caesar, as Caesar had planned to rebuild it as part of the renovations, including a new forum, basically right here, which was built by Caesar, also with a temple. Now, I'll be using a mixture of different media, including 3D models, to show how this entire area was. First of all, if we were to go back in time in the 2nd, 3rd century AD, the entire area that we're just in would look something like this. You could see it was a series of large squares with columns, with porticos, and with large buildings, whether religious buildings or in temples or administrative buildings like basilicas. The basilica for the ancient Romans was a court of justice, basically a kind of administrative and legal building. Now, if we are to superimpose the map of the ancient imperial fora, so in when we say forum, we mean one. Fora is the plural in Latin. So these squares, forum means simply square, were dedicated and built, by different emperors. The largest one here on the left, it's the last one to be built at the beginning of the 2nd century AD by Emperor Trajan. And then right next to it, the one with the little round parts on the sides is the Forum of Augustus. Right beneath that, just at the bottom, sideways, that's the Forum of Julius Caesar, and next to it, the Foro Transitorio. There is another Forum of Nerva. There is another one on the right, which is not in this map, which is the Forum of Peace, the Square of Peace, built by Emperor Vespasian. So some of the most important emperors and rulers of Rome, they left a memory of themselves in these large monumental squares, which were for the public to benefit, weren't just only a celebration. Here you can see them. One thing that you can straight see is that some of them, they're quite irregular. They have edges that are not perfectly symmetrical, and especially the Forum of Caesar and the Forum of Augustus, they're not perfectly geometrical. This and symmetrical. This is because they rather buy land on the market rather than impose a kind of expropriation, like taking the land off the private owners. That was seen as a way to respect the freedom of the can you hear me now? Do you hear the sound? Yes or no? Can you just yes? Let me see. Can you hear me? Do you hear the sound? Yes or no? Yes, you should be able to hear me. Okay, if you can't hear, just try to log in and out, or because there is the volume on, at least on you. Yeah, on YouTube and on Facebook. Now, this is the area right about 100 years ago. So right before the archaeological excavation knocked down most of an entire neighborhood called Quartiere Alessandrino, was a neighborhood which was roughly in this area. So from behind the Curia and the Senate, all this area here, they were all buildings at home. Some of them are still there, like these buildings here. They don't belong to the Roman age. They are Middle Age dwellings, private homes and houses. And all this part has been knocked down during the fascism in order to unearth all the ancient Roman monuments, which, told an history of the past, of the glories of the ancient Roman Empire. And of course, during the fascists, they were looking for the kind of glorification of the ancient Roman past. Now, I will be playing ancient Roman monuments, and let's see how they do look today. If we are to, fly over a little bit, this of course is the Colosseum, which was already out and it's never been completely covered and forgotten. It's always been out there because it's over 50 meters tall. And we are now on the ruins of the Palatine Hill. Let me go a little further, and then here you can see basically the ancient Roman Forum, and from here the Via Fora Imperiale here. But you could see basically now there is a straight road that goes all the way to the Piazza di Venezia. Let me just stop it now. I'll have a drone footage at the back. This gentleman here is Julius Caesar, the famous Julius Caesar, the as some of my colleagues like to say, the inventor of the Caesar salad. No, he didn't invent the Caesar salad, but it would have been quite a good thing. It was the leader of the Democrats, of the people who wanted to give more powers and wealth to the middle classes and lower classes, and less power to the oligarchs, the senators, which were basically land gentry. So he fought during the Civil War. He defeated his opponent Pompey, and eventually, as we all know, he was betrayed and stabbed the Ides of March, 15 of March, 44 BC. But before he did that, he invested a very large part of his personal possessions, of the money that he made through the wars, in rebuilding part of Rome. Part of the Forum was rebuilt thanks to him, including the Senate, the Curia, and this is the reason for which he wasn't stabbed in the Roman Forum, but in a different meeting hall not far from the Pantheon, the Curia Pompei, actually named after his former enemy that he killed. It's kind of ironic that he actually was stabbed right by the feet of the statue of Pompey that he actually had defeated and killed. And this is the Forum of Caesar. It was a large square with all porticos, with all pillars around, right beside the ancient Roman Forum. And on the other side, there was basically the Suburra, which was a neighborhood where lower classes used to live. And Caesar was actually born in that area. He wasn't from a lower class; he was from kind of a noble family, but not much money in the family, so he had quite a humble beginnings. Anyway, the structure of the forum was quite simple. Basically, there was a portico around, which was kind of an emergency back use for when it rained or the weather wasn't good. So instead of carrying the businesses in the square, even the trials and the contracts and everything, they could do that under the portico. And then bottom right, you can see the Curia Julia is basically the new Senate that Caesar had been rebuilt. And on the left, there was a temple dedicated to Venus Genitrix, Venus the mother, as the gens Julia, the family of Caesar, had believed for long in this legend of their origins, when they were the descendants of the hero Aeneas, who escaped from the city of Troy. You remember the Trojan Horse and what happened to the city of Troy, destroyed by the Greeks. And one of these heroes, Aeneas, escaped the destruction of Troy and brought his son and his father to a new land nearby, in the region of Rome, in Latium, long before Rome was even established. His descendants were Romulus and Remus, who established Rome, and then he is also one of the ancestors of Julius Caesar family, gens Julia. And so there was, because Aeneas was the son of a mortal, Anchise, and a goddess, Venus, he was demigod, he had divine blood, and hence that started a kind of idea that Julius Caesar was divo, was divine. In fact, after his funeral, a temple was built for him in the Roman Forum, where he was worshipped as a god. But he kind of suggests this kind form of divinity of himself even when he was alive. In fact, the temple, which had columns all the way around, there was a cella, which was basically an inside room with the apsis, where there was a statue of Venus, and he used to meet the senators once a week inside the very temple, where he sat in the room next to the ancestors, the goddess, under the protection of the goddess, as he was giving a message, a very clear message to the senator, that he wasn't like one of them. He was the basically sort of almost divine figure. So there was a very clear political message, which of course contributed to anger the senators, and of course to create the condition for the plot. They were afraid that Caesar was turning into a king or into a tyrant, especially after, from the 46 BC, he was appointed lifetime dictator. So it meant that he was never going to step down. At bottom left, there's this sort of Basilica Argentaria, which isn't really a basilica. It was the place where the money lenders and the money changers, basically some rudimentary form of banking of the Roman times. They didn't really have a bank system in Roman times, but it did have people in charge of money, exchange of money, exchange of valuables, and also they were included into the money lending. And because everything connected with trade or merchant, it was especially with money, and was frowned upon, they were moved out of the Roman Forum, which was more kind of a monumental religious and political center of Rome, moved to a new square, kind of in a position that they were not actually probably in the way. This is how the temple will look like, with columns all the way around, 8 columns on the facade, this kind of staircase where you have to kind of climb in order to get in, and then of course the cellar, which was only allowed for the priest, and of course for the use that Caesar did with the senators. The Roman Roman temples always were quite elevated. They had quite a deep foundation. But this foundation often had rooms in which they had a number of different purposes. For example, to store all the offerings, which people gave to and the gifts and the offerings that were given to the temples, to the deity. And in some cases, it even had a kind of a sort of schooling. Now, the idea that Caesar created of managing the power, the idea of leadership that Julius Caesar created, lived long after him, and still today it can be kind of a sort of model of political leadership. And that was pretty much emphasized during the Renaissance, which of course meant rebirth of art and culture. And we're looking here, some of the tablets made, some of the paintings, these are canvases made by Andrea Mantegna, which is an early Renaissance artist, for the Gonzaga family in Mantua, where they had all this celebration of Julius Caesar. And imagine that in the Forum of Caesar, they probably would have had some standards, some images celebrating the triumphs and celebrating the victories of Caesar. And this is what this is all about. And it was inspirational for the lords of Mantua to have such images that were actually illustrating the wealth and the power and the glory of Julius Caesar. You can read SPQR, which are the 4 letters that stands for the Senate and the people of Rome, and of course Julius Caesar, Pontifex Maximus, and a number of other, Divo, which means divine, and so on. There are several which have, basically to show a number of militaries, a number of looted artworks and gold staff and weapons which were taken from the enemies, and with the standards, with also inscriptions. They're called tabule ansate, those square ones. And also depictions. You can see here all the other soldiers holding up the standards with the battles and the different moments of the wars fought by Caesar, actually illustrated on this kind of images. And then you could see here, of course, the elephants and other animals which were taken during different campaigns. The Romans didn't really use elephants, but the Greeks used, and the Carthaginians used elephants in battles. And the Romans, of course, captured those elephants and then brought them to Rome as, a kind of a trophy to show to people. First time was in the 2nd or 3rd century BC, during the war against the Greeks, the first elephants which were captured and then taken to Rome. Later on, were only used in the circuses for fights. And then you can see Caesar here on the chariot with the laurel bell been put down on his head, as he always wore this kind of laurel. And lots of people, as Suetonius said, that he wore laurel because he was almost bald, and because he cared very much about his hair. That's probably something connecting men of power with the attention, almost the obsession for their appearance and their hair especially. And there's plenty of examples even in today's world. There's no need to mention any specific name. Anyway, because he was kind of bald here on the top of his head, he wore the laurel wreath all the time. It also has a palm branch, which also symbol of the military and sport victory. And what happened to all this area? Why is everything in ruin and abandoned? Well, Rome went under hundreds of years of basically economic depression and crisis and barbarian invasions and a number of other things. Now, this is an ideal reconstruction of how the same Forum of Caesar would have looked like back, let's say, around the year 1000, 10th, 11th century AD. And this is after almost about 500 years after the fall of the Roman Empire, after several barbarian invasions, after the war between the Goths and the Greeks, the Byzantines, and later on, even the Normans arrived in the 11th century, destroying and wrecking the city of the last things that were standing. So people left to fend for themselves, basically after the collapse of any form of central government. They actually started to take down some of these buildings and reuse them, and to build the dwellings reusing the construction materials that were just there and they were available to people to be reused. And this, you would see that the Curia, the Senate, survived because it was turned into a church in the 7th century AD, but the other buildings were literally knocked down. Many tons of white marble were basically put in a ditch and set with a fire and turned into limestone to be used, to as a form of concrete that to be used for construction. So they were destroyed for long. There is also between the Roman, the Forum of Caesar and the Roman Forum, this annual room. This was a public toilet called like a restroom. It's this part here. You can see this. This is semicircular. Here, this would have been a public restroom, which had all holes around on the seat where the Romans were sitting, like chatting next to each other, using a sponge soaked in vinegar to, wipe the seat and to wipe their own bottom. And of course, this, also was the cause of many infections and worms and other things. So they were the ancient times. They weren't that clean. Medically speaking. You could still see later on about 3 columns of the Temple of Venus have been rebuilt. So there's the brown part. It's the part that basically has been rebuilt in the 20th century using original pieces. Most of it has not been rebuilt. You can see here, these are the 3 columns here. So the brown part, modern bricks, and the marble is the original bits of marbles. And then on the opposite side, there's also the part of the portico still left intact there. And on the opposite side of the road, there is that kind of a wide and big wall right here. This is the Forum of Augustus, and here we have the port of Emperor Augustus. Augustus was the heir of Julius Caesar. He was his nephew. And there's a question, the public in men's men only. That would have been, for men. Yes. And this is one of the many portraits of Emperor Augustus that we have. Augustus was really the man that inherited the Caesar project, and he inherited also much of his personal wealth, and with that money he set up a private personal army, and he started to defeat his enemies, and eventually defeated Mark Antony, becoming the only ruler of Rome. He was then declared Augustus by the Senate, hence he became the very first emperor. To celebrate that, he had some grand projects. Now, we know very well and in much detail the life and the things that both Caesar and Augustus did, thanks to what they themselves left us. In his will, Julius Caesar left this res gesta to be cast in bronze in front of his tomb, the Mausoleum of Augustus, which has been recently restored and opened again to the public after 15 years being closed. And the res gesta is basically the things that he did. There are a list of how he brought peace and the end to the Civil War, and how he basically created the general, basically, reformation of the Roman Republic, which was in a state of a mess, and create the basis for a bright and prosperous future of the Roman Empire. Now, these inscriptions were lost in Rome. They've been a complete series has been found in Ankara, in Turkey, and they've been recreated right in front of the tomb of Augustus, in bronze, where you could see them. These were made in 1937 for the 2 millennium anniversary since the birth of Augustus, which was born in 63 BC. This is how the Forum of Augustus would have looked like. Now, if we look from above, what you could see, part of it is underneath the road, and part of it is here. There was a large temple dedicated to Mars the Avenger. Yes, you got it right. Mars the Avenger, like the Avengers. It was Marte Ultore, Mars Ultor, which was basically the god of war, and that was a sort of thanksgiving that Caesar gave for having killed and persecuted and killed the murderers of Julius Caesar. And then you can see that the wall is quite strange at the back. It's very tall. It's got an opening here, and then it's got the marks of the buildings which were there. And also, it's quite irregular. You will expect to be perfectly symmetrical. Even the temple has, a corner here taken out. The reason is that these lands were bought from private owners, which were willing to sell without being imposed to, and he didn't wanted to take the land off people didn't want to sell, because he thought it would have been, kind of a not the best start for a political leader. The emperor was never meant to be a dictator or a king or an absolute monarch. It was princeps inter pares. It was basically inter pares. Basically, it was the prince. It was the best of amongst equal. So he wasn't a different kind of man compared to the other free men of the city. He was just the best of them. That's why he was chosen to rule. So it was only after that then he was worshipped as a god, and his statue was placed in the forum here, and also in many other temples, and temples were dedicated to him and his ancestors. Anyway, you can see that the forum had a large square in the front, and then he had two these semicircular chambers on the side. Now, this is the map of how it was. We're not 100% sure how the lower part is because it's still underground, but many archaeologists believe that there were round rooms as well. What was these round rooms for? Well, they were like similar use to the basilicas. So there were court of justice, there were trials and similar things. Also, they were a celebration of ancient Rome, its origins, with the statue of Romulus on one of them, and in the other one, the statue of Aeneas, the hero that was basically the ancestor of the family of Caesar, hence of Augustus, which was a nephew of Caesar, which was adopted as a son by Caesar. And then there was the temple of Mars the Avenger, right in the center. And on the left side, next to the temple, there was a colossal statue of Emperor Augustus, of which only fragments have been found, but it was really, really a big marble statue that represented as a giant figure the Emperor Augustus. That was only placed there by Tiberius after the death of Emperor Augustus. And just to give you an idea, what was the importance of Emperor Augustus for the Roman Empire, in yellow, you can see the expansion of the Roman Empire up to the time of Julius Caesar. And Caesar was the one who conquers most of Gallia, hence nowadays France and part of Central Europe. The green part, from the dark green to the light green, are the conquests that Augustus made between 31st BC and 6 AD. Even though Augustus never won a single battle in his career, he trusted several generals, including Agrippa, which later on became his son-in-law, and also Tiberius, who later on became his adopted son and hence became his successor, becoming emperor in 14 AD. They were very skilled military commanders. Although Augustus wasn't, the other people won battles for him. And hence the Roman Empire almost doubled. And with such a vast empire, of course, many taxes and a lot of wealth came to the city of Rome. Hence, he transformed completely the city of Rome from a city of still wood or brick of poorer materials into a city of marble. Most of the marble temples and buildings have been rebuilt or done at the time of Augustus. He used to say, I found Rome made of bricks, I leave a Rome made of marble. And that is true. This is again how the Forum of Augustus would look like from above. And we have a video that shows how the the Imperial Fora, all of them, but specifically the one of Augustus, would have looked like. First of all, the giant temple, with also a frieze at the top, possibly with colored figures. We have this idea which derives from Winkelmann in the 19th century, of 18th, 19th century, these whiteness of the antiquity, all white marble. This is only because we found them white because the colors have faded. But then more detailed studies has proven that there were pigment, there was elements of color on these images. Then there were these giant kind of statues on the top of the portico on both sides, with these giant shields. In the center of the shields, there was the head of Jupiter Ammon, which was a way that in Egypt Jupiter got worshipped, a kind of in a syncretic mixture between the Ammon-Ra, the god son of the Egyptians, and the Greek god of the Greek and Roman god Zeus or Jupiter. So, and their heads have been recognized there. So there was all a meaning of kind of bringing together everything, all the best which is in the empire. Of course, inside the rooms, it was like a triumph of marble and statues, right? This is the left exedra, so this is the left of the two semicircular rooms. In the center, there was a statue of a man with his son Aeneas, the hero, with his father on his shoulders, and the son Iulo, from which the gens Julia basically descended. And we can actually enter then the temple of Mars the Avenger. And this is the cella. Inside, there wasn't just one statue, but there were the statues of actually the god Mars in the center, the goddess Venus with the little Heros, and possibly the statue of Julius Caesar as well. So there was not just one figure, but three giant statues on the main area. Originally, they thought there were just two. And of course, a large bronze doors which led again back onto the square. This is how the temple looks today, and this is the superimposed image, and then you could see the other rooms on the side. Stop. Now, this is the statue of Emperor Augustus, which is today in the Vatican museums. It's very important because it celebrates the apex of the power and the ruling of Emperor Augustus. You see also he's got this beautiful breastplate that has celebration in which religion plays a key role. There's a chariot of Apollo, there's the god Sky there that has this kind of covering as if the gods wanted him to be the ruler, and in the center basically the Roman insignia, the Roman standards, which were taken by the Parthian and will return thanks to the very important diplomatic work by Augustus. These were the Roman standards which were taken during the Civil War, and then when Crassus was defeated, so he would manage to get them back and was the symbol and the pride. So the standards for the Roman were like the flags for modern armies. So they were the only thing that could not fall into enemies' hands. So it's the celebration of this political power. Now, this is some of the views how they would have used these rooms. This is the room with Aeneas. There would have been, chairs and the court of justice and lawyers and everything to do contracts and carry out legal affairs. This was the main purpose of all of these squares. Basically, next to temples, there were also administrative buildings. The Forum was the heart of the economic and administrative Roman life. Now, this man here, it's Emperor Vespasian. So after Augustus, there was Tiberius, and there were the emperors of the Julius Claudian dynasty, which were very many of them had a lot of mental issues, including Caligula or excesses like Nero. So after Nero was overthrown, there was kind of a year of civil war, and then Vespasian was able to bring peace. To celebrate this, he had another forum being built, the Forum of Peace, of which right by the entrance of the Roman Forum, you can see these pillars which have been recently rebuilt using original pieces. And it was a large marble floor. Now, most of this as well is under the road, but there was also a library which was built, which is now basically part of it. It's the wall of the church of Santi Cosme Damiano. It's a church just overlooking the Forum. And inside of this room, which is basically a library, you can see all this, the armors with the scrolls and the tables for reading, studying. And there was a giant wall with a marble map of Rome, as it looked like. And this was made a little later in the 2nd century. So some fragments of this map had been found, and this is called the Imago, the Forma Urbis, which basically is very accurate document how Rome was during the empire, and thanks to these pieces, there's a deeper knowledge of Rome. Emperor Vespasian was the one who had the Temple of Jerusalem built destroyed. There was a kind of rebellion in Israel, and he had the Jews exiled from Jerusalem and many taken as slaves to Rome, and also the menorah and all the treasures from the temple being taken to Rome. Most of the monies were used to build the Colosseum. Here you can see this is the marble arch, which is in the Roman Forum, right by the, just not far from the Colosseum, that it's representing the Jews basically taken to Rome. You can see here they're all in chains, and there's the menorah here on the left being taken to Rome. It was in the Forum of Peace, and basically it was in that square to be, as one of the many trophies looted during the battles. And the menorah has then disappeared ever since. There's no, it's probably melted at some point. And this is how the Forum looked like. There were gardens in the center with pools, and then there were a number of rooms around, and of course the temple dedicated to peace. And this is one of the original fragments of the Forma Urbis, of this giant marble map of Rome, right on a giant wall. So this is like the Google Maps of Rome of the 2nd century. And so let me show you. So we are basically in this area. This is part of the, this is part of the Forum Patches, the Forum of Peace. On a wall over here, where is it? Right across the street. If I go across the street here, this is the road now today, as it looks today. Well, not today, pretty empty, but like a couple of years ago. Down there's a wall at the Church of Santi Cosme Damiano. On that wall here, there's the wall here. On this wall, there was the map, and this was part of the library. So you could see the square was pretty big, including all of this area, and went all the way right there. And so included basically all this part here was all included in the square. And right between the Forum Patches, which was here, the Forum of Peace, and the Forum of Augustus that we saw before, there was the so-called Forum Transitorium, the transit forum, because it was just a long stretch one with like a kind of a passageway where there wasn't much room for a portico, so they only just had pillars all the way around, but no portico because it wasn't wide enough. And Nerva kind of adapted. Nerva was an emperor at the end of the 1st century AD. And we have here a video as well, how it looked like. So this is how it looks today with the pillars with the frieze that you could see basically from the wall, and this is how it looked back in times. The frieze was basically a series of mythological stories, including the story of Arachnis, which meant the story of how a woman, which is very proud of her weaving, she bragged too much, and so the gods were envious, and she basically was turned into a spider. So it's most of Greek and Roman myths about like humans being, too proud. It's called in Greek, it's called the hubris, that you're too proud to they brag too much about what they do, and so they anger the gods, and the gods punish them. It's a lesson generally not to be always bragging too much about what your achievements, because you might anger the gods. And this is how the structure looked like. As you see, there's no portico, but just these columns for a kind of a the decorative reason, which were just in between, and they were just like kind of a giant passage between to connect the different squares. Otherwise, they, being isolated or quite disconnected. And of course, as well, there was a temple as well at the very top of the forum with the name of the emperor. Now we can sorry. This is another reproduction. The reason for these models and images and reproduction being different is that we don't really know 100% how they look like. We have kind of evidence, some elements, and also the last years there have been more and more excavations being done in the area, so more elements have been surfacing. So that's being changed. This is how the same ruins looked about 200 years ago. Just these giant parts of ancient monuments popping out from every corner of every street, and this is how it looks today. That's the myth of Arachnes here in the bas relief. You could see here the detail of the myth with all the figures, which back then would have been colored, so they would be very easy to the scenes would be very easy to be read and understood. And again, this would happen around the year 1000, and with basically people having animals and cattle and retransforming the square into just a dwelling and vegetable gardens. But the largest and the most important of the imperial fora was the one of Emperor Trajan that we have here portrayed. Trajan was the one who brought the Roman Empire to the maximum geographical expansion, including Dacia. Now, the Daci were this population living in nowadays Romania, which are pretty safe behind the waters of the river Danube, because the Danube was quite wide and very strong streams, so very hard to cross with a large army. So they actually, Trajan was able to build a bridge and to bring large armies across, and that really shocked the Dacians, which were defeated the first time, and then again there was a rebellion. They were defeated again, and Trajan was able also to loot quite a large treasure, and that was invested mostly into building a giant imperial fora, which is the largest of them all. It's almost twice as big as the one of Augustus. It's over 300 meters wide, 300 by 200, so it's really big. It's about 1,000 feet wide, and he had also a giant basilica. This one of which the pillars still survive. Pillars have been re-displayed, and the Trajan column, this giant 100 feet tall, 30 meters tall column of the emperor, with the statue of the emperor, and the so-called Trajan's market, which were not really a market at all, but for the sake of the tour, we call them Trajan's market. That's how they're known today. Still the original marble floor is partially preserved, and these are the ruins. They're basically dwellings that were built later on, and they've been partially preserved and not knocked down. In the center of the forum there was a statue of the emperor on a horse, pretty much like the one that can be found on the Piazza Campidoglio in the Capitol Hill. And now we're not. So this is the Basilica Ulpia, which was the Court of Justice, which was built right on the side of the forum, and on the other side there was the column. Now, as there wasn't really much space in this area, because here there was on this side the Capitol Hill, which was connected with a little hill to the Quirinale, which is this hill over here, where there's the Palazzo Quirinale up there. And so they had to dig this area here And that's the column is kind of to mark how high was the hill which was there in the way. Similarly, nearly 2,000 years later, Mussolini ordered to basically knock down an entire hill which was precluding the view right here at the end before the Colosseum. So this area here, there was a hill over here called Velia, and they just cut through. In fact, if you look here, it's much higher on both sides, and it's just they cut through. Now they're working to make another underground station here, the tube station, which will probably operative in another 5 to 10 years, depending. They've been going on for years and years, but it's very difficult to dig in archaeological areas. And you can see how, anyway, you could still recognize and see the perfectly geometry of the whole area. This is the column Trollone Traiana, which had over 100 meters of carvings on the side, which tell the entire story of the conquest of Romania and of Dacia. I have a video here to show you. Oh, sorry, this is not. Yes, this is Trajan's column. This is a 3D modeling. We could see the images were all painted, and basically these are the two military campaigns that Trajan fought in order to basically bring the to conquer Romania. Now the emperor here appeared at least 60 times, making a perfect mean of propaganda, of political propaganda. Now, very often the historian says that the winners write history, which is surely true for the Romans. It is not true for most of the other history. For example, this is not true for modern history or for recent history, but it's definitely true for the Romans. We didn't have a history of the conquest of Romania on the barbarian side. We didn't have the history of the conquest of many lands that were conquered by the Romans from the people which were conquered, but we do have very good description by Caesar himself, by many historians, and in this case by the emperors who wanted their deeds being carved into marble and written into books, so everybody knew their version. Now, originally there was the statue of Emperor Trajan, and the column was also meant to be the tomb of the emperor. At the very bottom there was a chamber, and there's a staircase that goes all the way up, which is still accessible. It's not open to the public, but it's still there, and it's still, you know, accessible. It still can still be used probably. In the 1500s, the Pope replaced the statue of the emperor, of course, with St. Peter with the keys, but the bas reliefs have been left intact, and of course there isn't the burial anymore of the emperor, but the original urns with the ashes of the emperor were there, which was quite exceptional because usually burials had to be done outside of the city walls. And this is to show you what consisted the different type of description that can be seen on the Trajan's column. Most of them, like a third, is marches. Of course, you have to get there to bring war upon someone, and then about a fifth of them are battles, and the others are like construction, negotiation, sacrifices. But a good 6% is just Trajan's speeches, so which is, I mean, quite remarkable, I would say. The column wasn't freestanding and isolated as it is today. There were two libraries next door, a Greek library and a Latin library, and they were, so people could climb up and see from different heights, so you could actually read it much better than you could see today, because today from a certain distance it's quite difficult to see the smaller details, especially the ones higher up. But some of them are amazing. This one is right at the bottom, and you can see the Roman soldiers carved in extreme precision, and there are hundreds of figures and cities, and then you can see this giant at the bottom is the river Danube, so it's the crossing of Danube. And then you can see here the boats, and then all the Romans with the standards all geared up to go and bring wars upon the barbarians. Now, the column isn't that one piece of marble. It's made of 13 different blocks, but still, each one of those blocks weighs several tons. So the question is, how did they build something that big and that tall? Because it's over 100 feet tall. Well, these blocks were carved. The staircases were carved inside, and then they were mounted on top of each other using a giant scaffolding with pulleys and levers and that kind of stuff. So you could see here in this model how complex was the construction of the whole thing. And this is a wooden model to show how the entire complex was, with the Basilica Ulpia right in the center, and then the which was almost 200 meters wide, so really amazing. And then of course there were the two libraries on the side and the large square. Now let's use the digital again to see how it would look like back in time. So we're entering now the Forum of Trajan, Foro Traiano, as we say in Italian. This is it's a large, wide square with marbles, again carvings, and there were also statues. An abundance of marbles. Some of the marbles are still there in place. You can see the original colors and the original patterns, which is really, really, really amazing. Of course, the rendering is more to give you an idea of how the space look and feel, and with abundance of precious marble, gilded statues. This is the basilica, which whose entrance it was on the side, and on the other side the Trajan column, which again was impressive. The lights came from large windows put above, but the Romans couldn't make large glasses, so the small glasses were mounted on larger windows. And then on the other side at the end there was another temple. And this is the column here from a close-up. So if you will unroll all these carvings, they are over 100 meters long, so over 300 feet long, which is quite, a long. It's like a comic book, but on a large marble, to explain and tell the story of all the battles, with hundreds and hundreds of figures carved along the column. And this is it. Now, right beside, and this is how the basilica look like. Now, right besides, and this is another reconstruction of how the basilica could have been inside, with this quite imposing roof. Now, before I mentioned the Trajan's market before, which is here, which actually were not a market. In these little shops at the bottom, there were offices of the basically the tax, the Roman tax collectors. Now the Roman citizens didn't pay taxes at that time, so Rome was free from taxes, but there were taxes on imports and goods and other things. So generally there was an income from the Roman citizen. Most of the financial support for the empire came from the colonies, of course, from the provinces from which heavy taxation was imposed. Now the building is pretty much unchanged since the ancient times. It's as irregular as it was originally, and on the top has been some reuse and certain things have been rebuilt. Now it has been transformed in the last 20 years into a museum which hosts most of the fragments which were discovered in the archaeological era that we've seen. So if we want to know how the different details were inside, you have to visit this museum. And it has preserved the original area that they believe there were actually some sorts of shops or some sort of maybe warehouses. We're not 100% sure. There must have been some selling going on, so it was partially a market, but not in the sense that we intend to. This is part of the marble decoration with the marble mask of Jove Ammone, which were originally in the Forum of Augustus. So they're different fragments from different areas. Now we can overlook, let's overlook from here. Yeah, from the terrace. We are on the top of the terrace here. And this is, open to the public. You can visit it. And you could see the entire view of it. The Victoriano here, the altar of the fatherland. This was built between 1885 and 1911. And then you can have the wide space of the Trajan's market here, which is quite amazing. Now there's another view here from the ground of the markets. This gallery here, and then the building standing there. You can see the street level is a little lower than the level of the modern city, of course, because over the years they've been keep building on top and on top, and then we're going to go on the very top again on the terrace, where you can enjoy a beautiful panorama on the entire Via dei Fora Imperiali. And then you can even walk on the ancient Roman road, pretty much preserved. This is known as Via Biberatica, bibenda, biber, no, from drinks. So it's probably they were selling drinks, or there were taverns where you could actually drink wine and so forth. I love this place because the feel of it is like really being back in times, because not much has changed since the Roman times. The road is pretty much unchanged. It's one of the best preserved that you can actually see in Rome. And then inside, the large collection of basically rooms that have reconstructions or fragments that derive from the different imperial fora. So fragments from the Forum of Augustus, and then let me just see the other one here. This is how the Forum of Augustus looked like in the little model. And then there are friezes and bas reliefs. So most of the most valuable pieces of the original decoration of the Fora, they've been basically displayed here. And then you can see this. We are upstairs in the gallery, and you can actually enter from one room to another. And this is part of the decoration made on painted marble, which was behind the Colossus of Augustus. And here, these are fragments of the statues which were there, including, here you can see of statues which were basically in the Forum of Augustus. So including this one here, you can see this giant hand. There's a fragment of giant hand, the arm, and then here the eye, which is this big. And this is part of the giant statue of Augustus, which was basically inside the Forum of Augustus. So here there is a pretty much detailed modeling and history and a number of images that represent how all this era was. So if you want to learn more about this era of the Imperial Fora, that's definitely the museum where to go and explore it. And you know, you can see most of these walls are just the original walls. I see there are a few questions. I'll be answering them soon. I just want to keep going. I just want to show you again now. And this is, of course, it's all the working to create that. And Mussolini had the road been built, and many of you maybe might be familiar with the maps that represent the evolution of the Roman Empire. These are just nearby the Colosseum. If you look at, it's here. If you look at the Via dei Fora Imperiali, so the road goes down to the Colosseum. Right before it arrives at the Colosseum, they are basically on this wall here. Now it's covered because they're working, and so you won't be able to see them. But as soon as they finish, they'll be open up again. And they're basically here. There are 4 maps, and there was a 5th one, which is not there anymore. The first 4 maps, they had the expansion of the Roman Empire from the very beginning till the second map is at the end of the Punic Wars, so 146 BC. Then at the 14 AD, after Augustus died, and then after Trajan died, which is the maximum expansion, which included so Britannia, all Northern Africa, the Near East, Romania, and so on. And that's 117 AD. And then there was a 5th map, which was the Italian Empire in 1936, with the Eastern Africa and Libya, which were basically the Italian colonies. So it was basically the project. The message was very clear to the Italians. Mussolini wanted to connect his own personal achievements of the Italian Empire with the ancient Roman Empire, proving that Italy could be again as it was in the past. Of course, all this was rhetorical, and we all know how it ended up. And I wanted to do this tour today just because Liberation Day is also connected with all this history, and these are the parades that they arrange with all the ancient Roman standard. The very symbol, the fascium, as you might say, was a symbol of democracy actually in the Roman Empire, and was a symbol of democracy during the French Revolution, but then was turned by Mussolini into a symbol of dictatorship, pretty much like the swastika was a symbol of prosperity, the symbol of the rising sun, and was turned into a symbol of oppression. And you can see here, this is actually military parades that were done in order to create that kind of celebration of the newly created fascist empire. Now I will be taking now the questions. You can write them on the chat, on the comments on Facebook, and so before I answer all of them, I remember, I just kind of remind you that next Saturday I'll be giving a talk about the myth of ancient Rome, Emperor Augustus, and the field of Mars. More specifically, we'll be visiting the mausoleum of Augustus, which has been recently reopened, and the Arapacis, the altar of peace built for Augustus. And we'll be seeing more of the personality of Augustus, how he did take power, how he completely transformed the ancient Rome, created that kind of myth of Rome that survives up to our days. And then the next day, we're going to go to the Vatican to discover the secrets of the Vatican. I'll be showing you parts of the Vatican City which are not normally open to the public, and also part of the Vatican City that have lesser known aspect of part, including a chapel which is not the Sistine Chapel. It's another chapel painted by Michelangelo. So you can find more information about these tours either on the Facebook group or on the website page, www.thegrandtoureurope.com. And now I have a last video and piece of music, but before I do, I'll be answering the question. Let me see. Public toilet. Yeah, public toilets were basically for men, but there were also toilets for women. And public means the general public. The temples on the Forum were used as religious temples or like worship monuments. No, they were actually religious temples. So they were actually, so one of the key problems that the Roman Empire faced is that by the time of Caesar, nobody really believed much religion anymore. There wasn't much, the Romans were not, let me just, okay, I can't get to that, I can get to this. Yes, there wasn't much, they weren't religious anymore, they didn't believe the ancient gods anymore. So one of the point of all the Augustus reforms, the fact that he refurbished or rebuilt more than 60 temples. It was that to get people closer to religion. That meant if they were more religious, they were also more prone to follow the emperor and to follow the leadership and to respect the rules. Yes, the marble arch in the Roman Forest is dedicated to Titus, which was one of the two sons of Emperor Vespasian, and himself became emperor between 78 and 81 AD, and then followed by his other brother, Domitian. Was the marble all local? No. So a large part of the marble was Carrara marble for the architectonical part, and part of it was travertine, which was from Tivoli. Most of it was Carrara marble, so from the Alps, and the Alpi Apuane in Tuscany. And then the statues, many of them were made with Greek marbles or marbles imported from Turkey. So most of the marbles were shipped from overseas, from Turkey, Greece, Northern Africa. Romans imported marbles all over the places. Why the Pantheon built so separate way from these monuments by the Forum and the Colosseum? That's a very good question from Anthony. I would be answering that question in the tour of the myth of Augustus, because they were built at the different times, and the Colosseum was built after all of these monuments, and it was built in around 80 AD, between 70 and 80 AD. So the Pantheon was built in 27 BC, the Mausoleum of Augustus in 28, and they were built in an area which didn't have many buildings, and they were built there for a purpose. And in between of them, there was the Arapaches, which was built another 15 years later in 13 BC. So there wasn't a Rome in ancient Rome a general planning. They just built as the city expanded. But the emperors had a specific idea of how the buildings, especially buildings with a large impact on the city, were going to impact the way how the city would develop. So that's very, very interesting. The Marcus Aurelius statue in this area is on the Capitoline Hill. So it's just on the other side from the Vittoriano. Emperor Hadrian of Caracalla ever built a forum? Hadrian did, but not in Rome. There were temples and other things. There are other cities that have squares built by Hadrian, but not. The area was pretty much done by the time of Trajan. It was just completely built up. Thank you. Let me see. Yes, I don't know if you have any more questions. Otherwise, I have a last video. And if you don't have any other question, let's see this. So let's just share again the screen, and I'll be playing some Wagner music, so we embrace the period. And let me see. I think the computer might not like Wagner so much. Okay, let me just try again. Sorry. Yes, I know why. This thing about Restream that you always have to press everything twice. They always get me. Let's start over again. Sorry about Wagner. Let's just have the poor. Okay, this we have to start over again as well. Okay, let's put Wagner again. Can you read it now? Okay, let's put Wagner again. Can you read it now? Yes.